So when you're crop planning, probably the key thing that you want to know is what yields are going to be. How much can you expect to harvest out of the bed? And I know that was the thing that I wanted to know when I started crop planning, and is makes all the difference. Now, when you're when you're planning out your week and how your team's going to work and allocating different labor and tasks, the piece of information that you need in that case is you need a rate. So you need a harvest rate to figure out how much time it's going to take to harvest, or a weeding rate to figure out how much time it's going to take to weed, or a planting rate. And for sure, you can farm without this information, but when you have good rates, you can much better plan out your week and approximate what's going to happen. And so just the same way that a yield is, never 100% precise. Weather makes a difference. The soil texture makes a difference. The mood of the people harvesting can make a difference. It's also the same with rates. So the amount of time it takes to weed or harvest or plant also varies in function of that. But nonetheless, getting good rates is what's going to make you able to plan well. So I'm Dan Brisebois. This is the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy. And I come here every Thursday at 2 p.m. to explore farming systems and spreadsheet solutions to your farm planning and management conundrums. And today we're going to talk about harvest rates, all kinds of rates, but I'm using harvest rates as an example because it's one of the most common ones that we think about. And we're going to jump into some spreadsheets. So just to start off, there is sometimes an idea to figure out how long it takes to do something that you need to get your team to track every last thing that they're doing throughout the day, throughout the whole year. And then at the end of the year, you add up all the time that they spent harvesting carrots, and then you add up all the bunches of carrots that were harvested, and you divide one by the other, and you get a rate. And that math does make sense. But the flaw in this is that what it actually gives you is it gives you a snapshot of what happened, not necessarily an idea of what could have happened or what should have happened. And so it's telling you a story about the good and the bad harvests. And what you would rather have is what a good harvest looks like and be able to plan around that. Now, So I'm going to talk about a more simpler approach to do this, but one way that you could do this is every time you assign a task to a team member, you give them a little piece of paper, and they write, their task, their name, what they're supposed to do, and how much time it took, and then what they accomplished during that time. And you could crunch each of those different tasks over the week, and that'll give you a really absolute idea of what good rates are and bad rates are. But that's a little bit heavier duty than I think most of you want to be doing. I know it's not something that excites me. So what I'm going to talk about is something that you can do on your farm that's going to be a lot easier. And it's essentially to be intentional about what you want to measure. So I'm going to jump into a spreadsheet. We're going to do two things. We're going to jump into a spreadsheet, and we're going to look at a Google form. We're going to kind of go bounce back between the two of them. And so let's get into that spreadsheet. So this sheet here, and do I got an address on it? Yes, I do. So I'm just going to post the place where you can get, this is the URL for the sheet. You can get it if you wish. So with this sheet, okay, actually I should highlight the links before we move on. So the link to this specific spreadsheet is spreadsheet.farm/FSA037. When you're there, there's another link you can click onto that's going to bring you to the Google form that we're going to be looking at in a moment. And then there's two other spreadsheet tips I'm referencing here, 25 and 26. Those are links to those tips where I go much more in depth into Google Forms. I'm going to go through it in here, but those are other tips that are about Google Forms. And So you might find that that helps flesh out what we're talking about here, because I'm not specifically wanting to do too much on Google Forms today. So I think the first thing that we do, so I'm just going to insert a sheet, is think about the kind of things that you might want to keep track of on your farm. What kind of rates would you like to perhaps measure? Now, so harvest rates, so the three things are, and I'm going to write these down. Let's make this bigger. Three things that you might like to look at are harvest, weeding, and planting. And you might want to do other things too, but these are three things that you probably spend a fair amount of time, especially the top two, and that would be worth doing. So that's three kind of activities you want to track. Another thing to think about is, let's say you want to harvest, what crops do you want to know about how long it takes to harvest? And you might want to know all of your crops, but you might also want to look at the top 10 crops in terms of sales and the top 10 crops in terms of space on your farm. So if I think about our farm, garlic is one of the biggest crops on our fields, onions, tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, probably salad mix too. I'll just finish there, but you want to choose the crops that that are the most important for you financially or space-wise, because these are the ones that, by figuring out a good crop, a good rate, you'll be able to optimize with and improve on. So that's the first thing to figure out, is what you're going to be measuring. And then the next thing you might figure out, so we'll come back to this actually afterwards. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a Google form to measure this stuff. So let me switch my screen. I'm going to go to another screen, another tab. And here we've got a Google form ready to or in process. So Google Forms are kind of like SurveyMonkey or any other kind of survey tool. And what's nice about them is that they're integrated with spreadsheets, with Google Sheets, which is why we're using them. And they're a really great way to gather information from your team and from your activities that's pretty uniform. Because one thing that spreadsheets don't like is when you enter stuff in all kinds of different ways. You spell carrots with 2 R's, you spell carrots with 1 R, you spell carrots with a couple T's, you spell carrots plural or singular. And so having ways to tie your data together and your different information together that's pretty standardized will really help your spreadsheets out. So the Google Form is a great way to do that. So here we have one set up for just tracking harvest rates. And I'm going to go through the different fields that we want to have on that. So the first one is a name, just a short answer. Who is recording this? The second thing is the task. And this, we're going to put a drop down and we'll write harvest, weed, plant. And then we'll also put, instead of a drop down, let's do a multiple choice. And then we're going to add an other. So this, people can choose harvest, weed, plant, or other, and with other, they'll be able to write that other in. And then we're going to add some crops. Now, I'm just going to copy paste those crops that we just wrote down in the other sheet. So I just copied that straight into here as a drop down. Again, we could also do it as a multiple choice instead, and that'll leave, we can have an other field. And then task units, this is what we're measuring, what we're doing. So there's we'll put a few multiple choices. So it's possible that you're harvesting bunches or you're harvesting weight. So for us, that'd be kilograms. You might do it in pounds, or it might be individual units that you're harvesting. If you're weeding something, you might be thinking in terms of 100 feet beds, or maybe just in terms of bed feet or bed meters. And so those are a couple of units that you might be using, and then it's probably good to have an add other. And the task metric, so this is going to be what you're actually measuring. And this should probably be a short answer. And we're going to put it in that we want it to be, so response validation, we want this to be a number. So we don't want someone to write tomato. You want it to be a number that they put into this task metric. The time that it took, let's say we want that in minutes. And we're going to also put this as a short answer. And we're going to create this again. This will be a number that we want it to be. So is number. And then the number of people that are involved in this. And again, we're going to do response validation and is number. And then a last field, just anything to note. So this, we've set up the back end of the form. And it's easy enough to set things up by just adding different questions and filling them out, making them required or not. I'm going to delete this, what I've added. The little red stars are what's required. And now to go and see this, we're going to click on the eyeball up in the toolbar. So click on that. And did it bring me to, okay, so I'm going to have to change the screen so that we look at that. I'm going to bring us over to, where is that one? Oh, here it is. And it's called harvest log. Actually, I'm going to change the name on the back end. This harvest log is the previous form that I copied to make this. Call it a rate tracker. Okay, and then I'm going to refresh this sheet. And here it says called rate tracker. So this is the Google form itself. And this Google form is something that exists in the cloud, and it has a URL, and you can make a bookmark on your browser homepage of your phone, so that you can quickly go to this from your phone or any device you have in the field. And when you're out there and you want to track something, so you tell your team, today we're going to keep track of what our carrot harvest rates are. And so we're going to, we're going to go through a specific area, and we're going to start all at the same time and end all at the same time. And we're going to keep track of the time that we do it. So everybody's on board for what we're doing. And so then, this is a stopwatch, or you just look at what time we start at what time you end. So afterwards, I could say, so let's say I'm recording this. So my name is Dan, and we were doing harvest, and we were harvesting carrots, and we were harvesting them as bunches. And then we harvested, maybe should we say task? I don't know, metric quantity. We could change this wording after. But let's say we harvested 225 bunches. And we did that in just about 60 minutes. Let's call it was 57 minutes. And we were 2 people who did this. And does that make sense? I'm kind of guessing the answer in the head. Yeah, it was probably a good harvest rate. And anything to note, we don't have anything. So we submit this information. And then we could later on do, maybe in a couple days later, we decide to harvest carrots again. And again, it's me recording this. And now in this, I'm not proposing that every time you harvest carrots, you record this information. It's that intentionally, a few times when conditions are good, you choose to harvest carrots, or when you're harvesting carrots, you choose to enter this information. And the same for the other things. And because what you're trying to do is figure out the rate at which you're doing that, so you can apply this information to labor tracking, farm planning, any kind of activity that you do. In our Farm Spreadsheets for All Seasons course, we use it for labor tracking and projections. You probably have other things that you'd want to use that with. So here, we're going to do another harvest. Again, it's carrots, and this time we're still bunches, and maybe we harvested 217, and it took us a little bit longer. It took us 65 minutes, and we were still 2 people, and we're going to submit this information. Now, I'm going to go back to that form that I just showed you. We're going to jump around a couple times. So we're back at this form, and if I go to response, so the questions is what we've been editing. Responses is where the answers are. And so already you can see there's been 2 responses. We just put them in, and you can analyze them this way. It's not the most interesting information here, but what's the real magic is up in the top, there's a little spreadsheet symbol. And I've actually, so you can go in and you can, is it here? So you click on this. Okay. So I think I've already set it up, but you can choose to set where your answers are going to go into a spreadsheet. So, and I've already, so you can do select response destination, and I already have my response destination chosen. You can also create a new spreadsheet, or you can select an existing spreadsheet. I've already selected an existing spreadsheet. It's the one that I gave the link to initially. And so we're going to go see what that looks like in that actual sheet. So one more time, I'm going to swap spreadsheets and bring us back to where we were here. And now there's another tab that's on there called Form Responses 1. And here in Form Responses 1, this is the information I just brought in. So you can see the name, Dan. That's the task was to harvest carrots, or what I harvested. Bunches of the task units. The task metric was 225, so 225 bunches. We did that in 57 minutes. We were 2 people, nothing to note. And there's also on the far left, there's the timestamp. So you can see that this was on May 20th at 1400 hours, so 2:16 in the afternoon. So that information is also tracked in here. And as I add other information elsewhere on that sheet, it just automatically updates here. Now, this information is almost complete. Let's make this a little bit smaller. This information is almost complete. We can just crunch some of these fields, these columns. Okay, we're going to do that. Let's wrap this text. And maybe we'll put a header that's a little bit different on the top. Put a blue header. No, we'll put it blue background with some white words on it. And I think these couple, just make them a little bit longer so everything fits in. Now, and this column here is where I added that extra question that I deleted. That's what exists right here. Now, to calculate your rates, there's a couple different things that you can do. I'm going to do 2 things. One is, one might be the more sophisticated approach, but it uses a little bit more spreadsheet finesse. And the other one is a little bit easier, but it takes a couple more steps. So maybe we'll start with the easier, which would be just to highlight all of this. And then we could create a pivot table in a new sheet. So that pivot table is here. And what we're going to do is we'll choose task. We'll add the crop. And then we'll also add, so we're going to add as rows, not as values, the task units, the task metrics, and number of people. Anything else you want to do? The time. We're not going to do the timestamp or any of that stuff. We're going to unclick all these show totals because they just bog down our pivot table. And we're going to repeat the row labels on each of these. So we basically recreated the information that's here. And we'll also add one filter, which would be for a timestamp that is not empty. So it gets rid of that blank row. And actually, I should show you why we're doing this workaround. So if I go here and so to figure out the rate, so in this formula here, the rate would be, so the rate is we're looking for how many bunches per hour. So we would do, first we figure out, so the amount of bunches would be equals 225. You could divide it by the number of people. So that's 112 bunches per person. And then divided by the minutes. So this gives you the number of bunches per minute. So 1.97 bunches per minute. If we divide this whole thing by 60, is that right? No, times 60. We're harvesting at a rate of 118 bunches per minute. And then we can use the decreased decimal places to make it just round it off. And we could copy this formula and bring it down. So it gives us a bunch of divided by zeros because it's dividing by both the time, number of people and time. So this formula works well. And in other kinds of spreadsheets, this would be a good place to have the rate. And then you could use a pivot table for it to show up elsewhere. But the challenge is, so I'm going to go, so you don't see what I'm doing, but I'm going to submit another answer. And so I'm going to submit, so Dan, harvest, we're still doing carrots. Bunches, we're harvesting, maybe we harvested 209 bunches and it took us 61 minutes, and number of people 2, and then we submit this information. And so once I submit that information, this line here just got added. And what you'll notice is the rate didn't get copied down. And that's it. This literally is the same thing as if I right click and I do insert one above, and it inserts a completely new line in. So that is the challenge that we're going to work around. Now, and I'll show you the sophisticated way to actually do it by the end of this. But for now, the workaround would be to do a pivot table that repeats all the information that's entered, which is what we see here. And I'll just crunch this a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the pivot table editor. And then you could add the rate afterwards, which would be what we had done. So equals the task metric divided by the time, or divided by the people, divided by the time, times 60. And we can, you know, 103 bunches per minute, and just drag this down. And every time we add something into the other sheet, it's going to add into this, this pivot table, and therefore go to the rates. And so it's also going to sort this information by carrot bunches and so forth, and the rates. And you now can see approximately, so if you measure a few times, you can see what the rates have shown up to be in this sheet. You could have this projected somewhere else, but this already, maybe this gives you an average, or not an average, it gives you individual rates. You could average this out, just kind of look at it and think, oh yeah, it's about 110 or so that I'm doing, and use that as a standard rate that you record somewhere else. And so by having your form set up on your phone and you're entering stuff every now and then, this information gets tracked in one central place that you can look at later on. And what's nice about that is because you probably mentally track rates all the time, or maybe you write them down on pieces of paper, but where those information go. And so this is where that information would go. And then you would, you'd have a database that you'd be putting together of all your harvest rates, your planting rates, your weeding rates, and that you can then draw on this to go and find, to go and plan information later. So I'm going to go back to that form response, and I'll show you how we can get these rates straight into here. And I'm not going to go too deep in this because it's an array formula, which a little bit more complicated, and that's not the topic of today. But so if we go in and I add in F2 to F, H2 to H, G2 to G, times 60. So I'm kind of turning these into ranges or columns multiplying each other, and I wrap it in brackets, and then I push, what is that? Shift, Command, Enter. It adds the word array formula in front of it. And now when I push Enter, that drops this column all the way down. So the formula is only in the first one. It's not in the other ones, but the answer, actually, I'll also format this. The answer is appearing everywhere else. So if I can't actually, if I try to write something here, it interferes with the formula. The formula gives me an error message. So here, if I were to type this, if I were to submit something and it gives me a 351, answer comes through. So this formula, even when you add more rows, so if I go in and I add 4 rows, the formula still drops down. And so it's still in link with your with the answers. And so you could have this then going into a pivot table. or being looked up some other way. So that's, if you're curious about that, you can go to the spreadsheet and look at how I did that. I'll get around eventually talking more about array formulas, but that's not today's topic. And so, yeah, so that is a simple system to keep track of harvest rates. And as we looked at also, if you set up your form to also, have the words weed and plant, you can keep track of those too. You might also, and another place that you might want to figure out with rates is, so I started off by discouraging you from tracking everything you ever do. But you might want to think about what crops are the biggest on your farm. So we talked about garlic here. We talked about onions, tomatoes. But think about the crop that, either you feel like takes forever or is one of your main things that or is just a headache, and choose a couple of those crops. And you can also make a list of all the tasks that you do with it. And so this is something, and I know I've talked about this in other places, but garlic is a crop that, for a long time was 1/6 of our revenue. I mean, our farm has grown bigger and garlic staying the same, so it got proportionally smaller. But it was 1/6 of our revenue, and it was a lot of work that we were spending in August, late July, August, and early September. And so we really went into figuring out what to do. And in that case, we tracked actually literally every minute that we spent in there. But another alternative we could have done would be to set up a sheet like this, and we could have thought, what tasks happen with garlic? So with garlic, there's the harvest. So that's the actual harvest. And maybe we could actually start off by saying there's the undercutting. Undercutting garlic. There's the actual harvest. And you can think about, then there's, after the harvest, we hang up the garlic. And then we would grade the garlic. We trim the stems off the garlic. What else do we do? Trim the roots. Maybe not necessarily in this order. And we would then clean garlic. You can already hear it's a lot of tasks. And then we'd package garlic. And these are the main activities associated with the actual garlic. You could also talk about mulching garlic. And in the spring, there was a bit of unmulching garlic and maybe some hand weeding. This is what our system was like. And so we kept track of these things, but we could also have simply recorded these rates and put them into our our chart, and then tracked, undercutting garlic, basically the minutes or hours per bed foot. And then the same for mulching the garlic, the unmulching and hand weeding garlic. And then the other stuff, the harvest, hang garlic up, grade garlic, all that would have probably been in bulbs or units per hour. Actually, when I said maybe it's actually bed foot per hour. That's how we've set up the formula. And then these would be units per hour that are harvested. And we can then multiply, knowing that we were doing about, 25,000 bulbs at the time. We can do that rate of how long it would take to do each of those things. So if this task had been, and I don't even know off the top of my head, but if we could undercut a garlic, so we had 14 beds and we had 25,000 bulbs. And so wherever there's bulbs, we're doing this. Excuse me. And then wherever there's 14 beds, we could be doing this kind of task. And then the rate here, so let's say we could do about, we could undercut a bed in about 15 minutes. So let's say it was quarter hour, 0.25 bed. No, that's bed per hour. So it's, if there were 200 beds, let's say we're doing 75 bed foot. So here's the math so it's actually, what we were doing was 75. So this is the metric. Should be 75 and then here's the time, which was in 60 minutes or in 15 minutes. And so the rate would have been, in that case, equal 75 divided by 15. So we're doing about, and then times 60. So we're doing 300 bed feet an hour. And knowing we have 14 beds, and so maybe we should just call, well, 14 beds equals 14 times 300 feet. Getting caught on the weeds here a little bit. What I want to show, though, is that having this amount times with what the rate was, if I do, and then time taken, or time to take, or time it will take, would be equals to the amount divided by the rate. It's probably about 14 hours. Is that right? I'm not liking that math. Is it this that's messing me up? Oh, it's because it's 300 bed foot. Yeah. So if we're doing 300 bed feet in 15 minutes, that's a rate of 1,200 bed feet an hour. So it's about 3.5 hours that it takes. And so you can have all your rates over here. And as you go through and figure them out, you can figure out approximately how much time it takes to do something, even though you only measured the rate. And so that's the key part here, is that by knowing your rate, you're able to project what you have for a total harvest or total amount of time for the year, or for a week, or for a day, depending what you're managing. And so the important thing is to set up systems to track those rates. So here, I've listed all the tasks that would be associated with garlic. I would put those into the rate form, and whenever I do something with garlic, I would, or not whenever it's a new time that I'm getting into that task, and it feels like it's going to be a representative sample. So something that's standard, normal weather, good soil conditions, a crew that's, in good form, not ragged at the end of the day, kind of track the rate. And that gives us an idea of what we can do when we're in, optimal. And it gives us, one, a planning tool that we can plan towards. And another thing, so it's the planning tool that we can plan towards, is this is how much, knowing this rate, this is how much time it'll take us to do that. It also gives us a something to measure ourselves by. If we're doing the carrots and suddenly we've harvested 150 bunches an hour and our usual is 118, then we know that we did something really well, and we can think about how come it went so much better. Or if we only did 70 bunches an hour, we can ask, why was that? Is it the planting? Is it the crew's technique? Is it fantastic? We need to optimize. So it gives things that we can evaluate by. And that's the real value of the rate. So to kind of tie it back together, rates are more valuable than measuring everything, because the rates give you what you can do. To keep track of rates, the first thing you want to do is choose what it is you want to measure. So what tasks, harvest, weeding, planting, what crops. And then the next thing would be to set up a Google form. And let me just bring that back. Set up a Google form that has the key questions on it that we can track. And then put a bookmark or a short link on your on a smart device, a phone, a tablet, something that you have with you in the field. And then when you go to when it's the time that you want to track rates, you punch in the data afterwards, and here it's just getting sent into your spreadsheet. You have access to it, and then you can then look at those rates and figure out what your averages are, what rates you want to use for planning, and there you are. So that's another Farmer Spreadsheet Academy Live. I'm thrilled that you've joined me. So I'll be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. with another fantastic farm spreadsheet topic. If you have anything, any farm planning or management challenge that you think a spreadsheet is part of the solution, feel free to send me a DM or an email or comment on one of these posts and tell me about it. I'm always looking for new things to tackle with the spreadsheet, and you might see the solution to your problem on one of these spreadsheet lives. So have a fantastic afternoon. Great